part of a talk I gave in Creemore, Ontario on May 27, 2026. Arctic over-the-horizon radar. Sources of information for this talk come from the Canadian Government, Department of National Defence, and Health Canada, both of which provide virtually identical information. Information is also provided by a book published in 1995 called Angels Don't Play This Harp, with HARP standing for High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project. Additional information is provided by artificial intelligence. Information regarding military over-the-horizon sites is often classified. Consequently, verifying some of the information provided by DND and AI has not been possible. The part of the electromagnetic spectrum related to this presentation include extremely low frequency electromagnetic fields and radio frequency radiation, including dirty electricity and megahertz frequencies used for the radar. Guidelines for radio frequency radiation are provided by Health Canada's Safety Code 6. These guidelines are based on shock at the lower frequencies and heating of tissue at the higher frequencies. According to Health Canada, if it doesn't heat your body, it can't hurt you. This information is false. The top left corner of each slide indicates the source of information for the slide. Information on the slide comes from the Government of Canada. The Arctic over-the-horizon radar involves a transmitter site that bounces the radiation off the ionosphere. This radiation is then reflected back to the receiver site. 4 sites are planned for Ontario. 2 sites have been identified for Stage 1. This includes the Kawartha Lakes site as a permanent transmit site and Clearview Township as a preliminary receive site. The good news is that work on these sites won't start until the winter of 2026, and Stage 1 isn't expected to become active until 2029. Full capacity is anticipated by 2043, so there is time for residents to oppose this installation if they choose. The transmit site involves 400 acres and is surrounded by wetlands. This will become important later on. This site includes mammals, birds, reptiles, and amphibian species, some of which are federally or provincially listed as species at risk. Use of the surrounding land near the transmit site may be restricted in the future. The antennas will be 45 meters tall, similar to a 12 to 15-story building. The receive site involves 700 acres on prime agricultural land. It is also near ecologically important wetlands that are regulated by the Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority. The antennas at this site will be much shorter, at a height of 6 meters. Frequently asked questions are available on the Government of Canada websites. One of those questions is question 6. Should residents be concerned about health and safety issues related to the radar system? The answer directs you to Health Canada's Safety Code 6, which is totally inadequate to protect living organisms. It also states that there will be 3 types of fencing at the transmit site that will keep people, livestock, and wildlife out, but these fences will not keep radiation in. Furthermore, the Canadian government states that there are no known harmful effects associated with the receive site, but they do not mention the transmit site that will have much higher levels of radiation. The peak power in watts determines how far a wireless device will transmit information and how much energy it requires. Over-the-horizon radar has peak power from 1 million to more than 10 million watts and can transmit information 3,000 kilometers. It requires a lot of energy, similar to some of the large cloud data centers. More about this in the next slide. According to the Department of National Defence, the radiation at the receiver site will be 1 trillion times less powerful than a cell phone. I find this difficult to believe. Over-the-horizon radar sites must be in a remote, flat, and dry area, having limited environmental constraints, be a suitable distance from radio noise sources, and be close to electrical power sources. These sites need between 1 to more than 10 million watts of power, similar to large data centers. Tucker Carlson interviewed Kevin O'Leary, who is planning to build a multi-gigawatt data center in Utah. During this interview, O'Leary stated that when a data center was placed in an existing community in Virginia, the cost of electricity to residents increased by 30%. The DND is treating the Southern Ontario power grid as a free, bottomless resource for their radar project. By failing to disclose the power consumption, they are avoiding the question of whether this massive load is even sustainable for the local grid, or if it will lead to brownouts, grid instability, or increased costs for ratepayers in the region. In other words, the government is choosing to build in a populated area because it's cheaper for the military-industrial contractors. Another frequently asked question is question 8. Will there be environmental impacts from this program? And this is how the government responded. Department of National Defense will conduct the environmental assessment. The assessment will include soil and groundwater contamination, watercourse and wetlands, flora and fauna, and historical and archaeological potential. Since the nearby municipal governments do not have expertise in this area, they need to have the site assessed independently from the Department of National Defense or the federal government. If a company wanted to dump toxic waste near your community, would you want them to assess the environmental impact or an unbiased agency? Populations near large-scale pulsed radio frequency radar and transmission arrays report symptoms referred to as radio frequency sickness or microwave syndrome. These include neurological distress, headaches, migraines, vertigo, and cognitive fog. Sleep and circadian rhythm disruptions. Residents report insomnia and sleep fragmentation. Immune and endocrine dysregulation. Long-term exposure to these fields have been linked to suppressed immune responses and hormonal imbalances. The body is essentially in a state of chronic, low-level fight or flight. In other words, these fields disrupt the nervous system, the circadian system, and the endocrine and immunological systems. Livestock behavior in your high-powered transmission and radar infrastructures includes aggression, loss of appetite, reproductive failure, and increased mortality in cattle and poultry. Ground current travels through metal infrastructure in barns and milking parlors, shocking the animals and causing massive systemic stress. Ground current follows the path of least resistance that includes moist soils, metal pipes, gas or oil, ground rods, and plumbing. According to AI, the potential for ground current issues in the Kawartha Lakes and Clearwater area is substantial. Soil conductivity depends on moisture content and the presence of groundwater. If the sites are located over aquifers or areas with high water tables, the ground current will be significantly amplified. This energy will create hotspots of current that extend far beyond the perimeter of the fenced-in site. Note that both sites are near wetlands. Ground current travels along metal structures, causing stray voltage and contact current. Well casings and municipal water pipes, home grounding rods and plumbing, underground power lines and telecommunication cables, metal fencing and agricultural irrigation systems. Constant low-level flow of ground current can have profound biological effects. When I saw the antennas on Health Canada's website, they reminded me of another site in Alaska mentioned in the book Angels Don't Play This Harp, with HARP standing for High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project, as shown here on Google Maps. The nearest village is 13 kilometers away, and a larger hub is 42 kilometers from this location. HARP has 4 gigawatt of effective radiating power, and their research building is 800 meters from the fence line, which tells me that the U.S. military and the University of Alaska believe this is a safe distance. The environmental concerns can be summarized as follows: disruption of ionospheric instability, potential weather and climate modifications, ecological interference affecting wildlife and migration, possible biological and neurological impact on humans, insufficient environmental oversight and public accountability, expansion of geophysical and electromagnetic warfare capabilities. Artificial intelligence says that none of these are fringe concerns. They follow directly from the power level frequencies and institutional context in which these systems operate. When I asked AI if there were similar sites to the one proposed for Ontario, and the answer was yes, in Australia, and that site had been in operation since 2014. According to the Department of National Defence, the Canadian system will be larger, more powerful, more sensitive, and more invasive than the site in Australia. This is good news. If an over-the-horizon radar site has been in operation for a few years, we can learn from their experience. Are there any health effects reported among those living near the site? Here's a comparison of the two sites. The Jorn site in Australia is 20 to 100 kilometers away from communities, so there are unlikely to be harmful effects at that distance. The sites in Canada are more powerful and are much closer to communities. Furthermore, the Australian site has a fly-in, fly-out program for workers sites due to health concerns, and I was able to verify this information. Question: how many active over-the-horizon sites are in Canada? Answer: none. 4 are planned, with Kawartha and Clearview being the first 2. Question: how many active over-the-horizon research radar sites are in the United States? Answer: 3 active sites in Virginia, Texas, and Puerto Rico. All are at least 20 to 30 kilometers away from communities except Puerto Rico, which is just 1,500 meters away, and this site has been in operation since 1993. Question: are there any health effects near the site in Puerto Rico? Answer: yes, but there is toxic heavy metal waste near this location, including lead, aluminum, arsenic, cadmium, and uranium. Cancers are 26% higher than in the rest of Puerto Rico. No baseline study was ever conducted. Pre-existing toxic burden since the 1940s. Residents did report a qualitative shift in their suffering after the radar became active. Synergistic interactions between pulse radiation and toxic chemicals include increased blood barrier permeability, allowing more toxic metals to enter the brain. Disruption of immune function, making the body less able to clear the existing toxic burden. Acceleration of neurological decline, particularly in children and the elderly. Here's the Kawartha site, which is a transmitter site. Question: how far away should people be to minimize health effects? AI provided the following zones. Primary danger zone within 5 kilometers. Secondary impact zone within 15 kilometers. Biologically neutral zone beyond 15 to 20 kilometers. Within the 5 kilometer zone, residents should expect sleep disruption, headaches, tinnitus, cognitive fog. Birds, bats, and pollinators may experience disorientation and avoidance behavior. Within the 15 kilometer site, People may experience chronic fatigue, heart palpitations, electromagnetic hypersensitivity with symptom onset or symptoms worsening. Livestock may have behavioral changes. Aquifer concerns are from the site's construction. Beyond the 15-kilometer zone, this zone is where acute symptoms become less common, but chronic low-grade effects can't be ruled out, particularly for sensitive individuals, children, and the elderly. Note that most transmitter sites are at least 10 to more than 20 kilometers away from communities. This site is anomalous in that it's so close to existing communities. Here's the Clearview site, which is a receiver site. AI provided the following zones. Immediate vicinity zone at 2 kilometers. Buffer zone within 5 kilometers. And the sovereignty zone beyond 5 to 8 kilometers. Within the 2 kilometer zone, wildlife corridor disruption may be expected. For humans, noise, light pollution, security presence, and the psychological weight of living next to a strategic military target, first strike location in a conflict. Within the 5 kilometer zone, runoff and groundwater contamination risks from construction. Property values will decline and there will be aesthetic degradation. And beyond the 5 to 8 kilometer zone, this is close enough to be affected by any escalation at the site. Security lockdowns, airspace restrictions, increased military traffic. Note, most receiver sites are at least 5 to more than 10 kilometers away from communities. I would like to end with a summary and recommendations. Arctic over-the-horizon radar will emit radio frequency radiation between 3 and 30 megahertz and extremely low-frequency electromagnetic fields and light pollution. It will also generate dirty electricity and ground current. Adverse health effects are likely to include symptoms of electrohypersensitivity, reproductive problems in both humans and animals, and cancers with prolonged exposure. Use of electrical grid may result in brownouts and higher electricity bills for the residents. Migratory birds may become disoriented. Livestock are particularly sensitive to ground current pollution, leading to increased corrosion of underground pipes as well. Soil microbes are likely to be adversely affected by the ground current, which in turn may affect plant growth. Insect pollinators may be affected, especially bee populations, which are already struggling. Health Canada's guideline, Safety Code 6, does not protect human health, and numerous Health Canada statements are false. And finally, communities need to decide if they are in favor or opposed to these two locations that are much closer to populations than other over-the-horizon radar sites. Recommendations. Transmitter sites should be at least 10 to 20 kilometers from settlement. Receiver sites should be at least 5 to 10 kilometers away from settlements. An independent environmental assessment is required since municipal governments lack internal expertise regarding this issue. Relying on the federal government, the Department of National Defense, is not an option. Should the construction go ahead, it is important that the environment be monitored before and during operation. This is to ensure that no adverse effects are occurring and, if they are, to respond as quickly as possible to minimizing impacts on human and environmental health. Most municipalities don't have the funding to pay for this, and since this is a federal initiative, they should request funding from the federal government. Disclaimer: information regarding military over-the-horizon radar sites is often classified. Consequently, verifying some of the information provided by the Department of National Defense and Artificial Intelligence has not been possible. For more information about the biological effects of electromagnetic fields and electromagnetic radiation, please visit the websites provided here. For more information about electrohypersensitivity and how to minimize your exposure, visit the Electrosensitive Society website at www.electrosensitivesociety.com. Thank you.